In the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall you have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Also, on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be an holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And you shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement for you before the Lord your God. On the first day of the month was the blowing of trumpets. I didn't do a real good job here, but warning, 10 days until judgment. That's what the trumpets were a message of. Yom Kippur was coming, the Day of Atonement. And the Jews called it the 10 days of awe between the Festival of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, because it was a very serious time. It wasn't a sad time, but it was very serious. On Rosh Hashanah, their destiny is inscribed, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. Their idea was that on Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Trumpets, God would open his books of record. He would begin investigating. And he would make his decisions through those 10 days. And on the 10th day, the Day of Atonement, he would give his verdict, and the final decisions were made on the Day of Atonement. And so we're talking about judgment. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. That's from Daniel. And when we look in Revelation, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. In Leviticus 16, we have the complete description of the Day of Atonement. And it says, "And this shall be a statute forever unto you, that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls and do no work at all, whether it be one of your own country or a stranger that sojourneth among you. For on that day shall the priest make an atonement for you, to cleanse you, that you may be clean from all your sins before the Lord." Through the year, the people had brought their sacrifices, and whatever they needed to do to take care of the sin problems or whatever purification there needed to be. And it was all done before they got to the Day of Atonement. Because when they got to the Day of Atonement, it was final. If it hadn't been taken care of during the year, they still bore their own sin. So in Leviticus 16, you can go back and study that yourself. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there. But in Leviticus 16, it gives all the details of what would happen. And I'm going to just give a brief summary of what the people would do and what the priest would do. Starting in the evening on the 9th, the people would begin fasting, because this was a serious day. This was the only one of the feasts where they were expected to fast. All the other ones were a feast day. They were more of a celebration type thing. But the Day of Atonement was a serious day. So the people would begin fasting on the evening of the 9th, and they would continue fasting through the 10th day. The first thing that the priest would do, as far as the Day of Atonement services on the 10th day, was that he would change out of his colorful robes, like I had on before. He would take those robes off, he would bathe, and put on the plain white linen. And then he would have a bullock, a young bull, as a sin offering for himself, and he would have 2 goats as a sin offering for the people. He would have those available for when he needed them. He would cast lots. In other words, he would do a process of decision between the 2 goats, which one would be for the Lord and which one would be the scapegoat. The Lord's goat was sacrificed during the process, but the scapegoat was kept alive. So that's something we need to kind of keep in mind. He would offer the bullock as a sin offering for himself. Now I want to do a little bit of the ritual here, I guess you could call it. The first thing that he needed to do, even before he did anything with the blood, it doesn't say this, but we have to almost assume it. He would go into the most holy place. Now I'm going to move the altar of incense out of the way here because we need a little more space to work. So I'm going to just move that. The first thing that the priest needed to do to shield himself from the Shekinah glory. Now, I'll open this a little bit here so that you can see in here. Now, I have a light there that's relatively bright, but I'm thinking that the Shekinah glory was something that would almost blind you if you looked at it. If you're familiar with the welding flash, you just look at it just a little bit and you got to close your eyes. I'm thinking that's what the Shekinah glory looked like. The first thing that the priest would do is he would take incense in, he would have the hot coals in the censer, and he would go in behind the curtain. He would never actually open it up probably. He would just slip in behind the curtain. He would put the incense down, possibly on the ground in front of the ark, and he would put the incense on the hot coals so that it would make a smoke screen. And it says so that he would not die. There was kind of a shield of incense between him and the Shekinah glory. So he would, I'm assuming that he did that first, and then he came out and sacrificed the bullock for his own sin offering so that he and his family were purified. He would take the blood from the bullock and go into the most holy place and sprinkle it 7 times. And then he would come back out and kill the lamb that was for the people. It was a sin offering for the people. And he would take the blood of the lamb in and do the same thing with that. Sprinkle it in front of the ark and on top of the ark. Then, of course, the altar of incense was still in the middle, where it always stood. He would bring the blood of both animals and apply some to the horns of the altar and sprinkle it there. And then he would come out to the courtyard again. And he would, in what he was doing here, he was cleansing the inner sanctuary, the most holy place. And what he did at the altar of incense, he was cleansing the holy place then. And then he would go out to the courtyard, and the next stage had to do with the scapegoat. The high priest would, it's like he was carrying the sins that had been in here. He picked them all up for wherever the sins were. He'd just gather everything together and bring it out and dump it all on the scapegoat. Okay? The sins had been accumulating in the tabernacle through the year, through the offerings and everything. It's like they were stored in there. He would gather all that sin up and bring it out and confess it on the scapegoat. And then somebody that had been chosen previously would take the scapegoat out into the wilderness and turn it loose out there, and it was supposed to die out there. Okay? He would send it away. It says the Bible says he would send it away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. Then the priest would change back into his gorgeous robes again. He would take the plain linen off, bathe himself, and put on the fancy robes again. And then he would offer one more offering, a burnt offering for himself and the people as kind of a consecration. All of this ritual in here it's called the Day of Atonement. And that word atonement is very significant. It means at one-ment, at one. God and his covenant people were brought back together. They were at one. Okay? And then, when that all was finished, he would offer the burnt offering as a consecration, kind of the final consecration for the people. Now they were fully at one with God again. It's like renewing the relationship, renewing the covenant again. Here we have the scapegoat in the wilderness and a couple of things that explain a little bit there. When he hath made an end of reconciling the holy place and the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, he shall bring the live goat, and Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgressions and all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send him away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness, and the goat shall bear upon him all their iniquities unto a land not inhabited, and he shall let go the goat in the wilderness. And here is from the book, The Faith I Live By. As the priest, in removing the sins from the sanctuary, confessed them upon the head of the scapegoat, so Christ will place all these sins upon Satan, the originator and instigator of sin. The scapegoat, bearing the sins of Israel, was sent away unto a land not inhabited, to the wilderness. So Satan, bearing the guilt of all the sins which he has caused God's people to commit, will be for 1,000 years confined to the earth, which will then be desolate, without inhabitant, and he will at last suffer the full penalty of sin in the fires that shall destroy all the wicked. Satan is the one that is responsible for everything that any one of you have done. He is the original instigator of it. And when you come to Christ, when you come to God and ask for forgiveness, God puts the responsibility of your sin back on Satan. He's the one that's originally responsible for it. He's the one that's going to bear the iniquity. Okay? He doesn't do it right away, though. There's a two-stage process in it. I just want to back up just a little bit. The man would take the goat out into the wilderness and turn him loose. But there's a story in Jewish tradition that one year the man took the goat out into the wilderness and turned him loose, and a few days later, the goat showed up back in camp. That's no good. After that, when the man took the goat out into the wilderness, he took him to the top of a cliff and shoved him over so that he'd never come back, because those sins were not supposed to show up again. They were supposed to stay away. Okay? Now, back to this two-stage sin cleansing process. During the year, the people would bring their offerings and everything, and the guilt was taken off of the person. They were guilt-free at that point, and the sin was like it was stored in the sanctuary. And then on the Day of Atonement, that was one stage. On the Day of Atonement, the priest would gather it all up, put it on the scapegoat, and send him away, and that's the second stage. Now there's some interesting meaning in that, and again, I'm not sure just exactly what all that means, but God is holding all of that guilt and sin until at one time he can dump it all on Satan at one time. And Satan will perish with all that guilt on him. All at one time. He will bear the iniquity because he's the instigator of it. He's responsible for it. Now, anybody that didn't bring their sacrifices during the year and get that taken care of, they would bear their own iniquity. They would get the retribution for it. And now, when we think about this, anybody that doesn't accept the gift of forgiveness that Jesus offers, and they don't come to him for that forgiveness, they will bear their own iniquity. They will die for their own sin, because they're responsible for it. So that's kind of a summary of the Day of Atonement, what happened on the Day of Atonement. Now we're going to turn to this verse in Daniel. This brings us to some prophetic things here. Daniel 8:14. He said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Daniel 8 is a vision of a ram and a he-goat. God gave this vision to Daniel, telling him what was going to be happening in the future. And the ram was there, and he was being aggressive. And the goat came along and took him down. And then the goat became great. The goat had one horn. The one horn was broken. 4 horns came up from that. And eventually a little horn came up among those 4. So that's kind of a summary of that vision that Daniel had. Now, a lot of people, Bible prophecy students, their first thought is the little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. And if you read history, 1st and 2nd Maccabees and other areas of history, there are a lot of things that Antiochus Epiphanes did that fit the description that Daniel was given here. But Jesus himself said in Matthew 24, when he was talking to his disciples, he said, the abomination of desolation is still in the future. And so Antiochus Epiphanes was before Jesus, but Jesus said the abomination of desolation is still in the future. You'll have to go to Matthew 24 and read that. You know, he said the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. When you see that, then do certain things. So, Jesus was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and he was also talking about the end of time. A lot of you are familiar with this. This is common stuff. He was talking about the end of time. Now, we are living in the end of time, right? Okay? So what I'm going to be talking about now is several aspects of the cleansing that Daniel 8:14 was referring to. There's several different aspects of that I want to talk about. Okay? Oh, here's a picture that's representing Antiochus Epiphanes and his soldiers and all that they did. October 22, 1844. Most of us are familiar with that verse, or that date. And in the early 1800s, there was the Great Awakening, the Great Advent Awakening, where people came to the realization, or came to the belief, that Jesus would be coming soon. And because of the prophecy of the 2300 days, they set this date. I don't have time to go into all the chronology of that, but they set this date as the end of the 2300 days. And they thought that's when Jesus is going to come, because it said he was going to cleanse, sanctuary will be cleansed at the end of 2300 days. They thought the sanctuary is the earth will be cleansed of sin, and Jesus will take his people to heaven. Well, it didn't happen. And they were obviously, and rightly so, very disappointed. If you were anticipating the greatest event in the whole universe on a certain day, and it didn't happen, you'd be disappointed. But as they continued their study, they realized that the prophecy wasn't talking about the earth being cleansed of the sin problem and Jesus coming back and all that. They realized that there was another meaning of that verse, talking about the sin problem of the heavenly sanctuary being cleansed and sin being taken away, just like on the Day of Atonement for the Israelites. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but October 22 of 1844, October 22 of that year was the Day of Atonement. It was the 10th day of the 7th month in that year. That's why they chose that date as the date that they thought Jesus would come back. But it was at that time that Jesus started his Day of Atonement ministry in cleansing the whole system of sin, as the priest was doing, as the high priest was doing on the Day of Atonement. Jesus started that process on that day. So that's kind of the, I suppose we could say, the heavenly aspect of the Day of Atonement. That's just a very brief summary. I'm not going into much detail because I don't have much time for it. But that's kind of the heavenly aspect of the sin cleansing of the sanctuary, following the symbolism of the Day of Atonement. Now, there's another part of that prophecy of Daniel 8 that I want to look at a little bit. It talks about the little horn desecrating things. You know, the little horn would do this, and the little horn would do that, and all those things. Okay? Here's some of it. He magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. That's Daniel 8, 11, and 12. The next verse says, Then I heard one saint speaking to another saint, speaking. And another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? Now, if you probably don't have your Bibles open, but in the King James Version, I'm going to back this up, in the King James at least, where it says daily sacrifice, you'll find that the word sacrifice is italicized. That means that it wasn't an actual word in the original language. They put it in because it seemed to make sense. But it really should say, by him the daily was taken away. Okay? And then we go to here. How long shall be the vision concerning the daily? Well, in our last session here, we learned about the daily. The daily included all kinds of things. All the ministration that the high priest did was included in the daily. And it's saying he would take away the daily. The little horn would take away the daily. The continual ministration. And we know that the continual ministration of the priest in this sanctuary is a symbol of the continual ministration of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary. So when it says the little horn would take away the daily, it's like he would push off to the side whatever Jesus was doing and put something else in its place. Okay, now, this verse here, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily, and it goes through that. There's three parts of that question. Okay, we'll go here. How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? So you have three different aspects of the question. It's concerning the daily, it's concerning the transgression of desolation, and it's concerning the sanctuary and the host being trodden underfoot. Three parts of the question. Now we get into a little bit of language thing again here. He said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. That Hebrew word there for cleansed is kind of a hard word to translate, because it means a lot more in Hebrew than we can translate into English very easily. Okay? There's several meanings of that word. The Hebrew word is nitzdach. One meaning is to set right or restore to its rightful place, to be correct or corrected. Another one, to cleanse, to justify or make righteous. These are all the meanings of that one word. They're all similar, but they're slightly different. To vindicate from injury or clear of legal charges. So there's basically three different meanings of that one word. So, how does that apply? Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The daily that was taken away would be restored. Okay? All the ministration that the little horn eliminated and changed would be restored at the end of that prophecy. We'll get into that in a little bit. The transgression that has caused desolation would be cleansed and replaced by righteousness. That's kind of the cleansing that Jesus would do. The transgression would be cleansed. And the sanctuary and host that were trampled on and disgraced will be vindicated and restored to honor. Now, when we think about the little horn there, that's the little horn that came up among the four, and in the background you have the Middle East pictured. The little horn, we understand it to be the Roman powers, the Roman Empire and the Roman Church that came into power afterwards. And during the time that Rome was in power, they did all kinds of things that desecrated God's system. The continual, all the ministry that Jesus did, or that is represented by what happened here, all of that was changed or twisted or eliminated or something. Instead of having Christ as the priest, they put in earthly priests. They made sacred images, icons. There was all kinds of rituals that they put into place. There was indulgences. There were all kinds of things. You could go through each one of these items of furniture and think about what the priest would ordinarily do, and the Roman Church substituted something corrupted in place of whatever the priest was doing through the whole system. They changed Sabbath to Sunday. They changed God's festivals to pagan festivals. They just did all kinds of things to twist the system. Well, at the time of the Reformation, a lot of that was slowed down and changed. Martin Luther was kind of one of the leaders there that kind of put the brakes on what the Roman Church was doing. And after the Reformation and in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, there was a reformation and a revival of Christianity. People started studying the Bible more. They started understanding prophecy more. Bible societies were formed. Missionaries were starting to be sent out. And so a lot of those problems that the Roman Church had done, things that they had corrupted, were slowly corrected and restored to what they should have been. And so, with the daily that was taken away, it was cleansed and restored. It's like the light broke, the light of the Reformation broke, and it got brighter as time went on, and the power of the Roman Church was broken. The heavenly sanctuary was discovered or rediscovered, the meanings of those things. So in those ways, the daily was restored because things were brought back that had been eliminated and corrupted. There's coming a time when there's going to be a lot of things twisted again. We're coming up to that again. But the final thing will be that it will be fully restored. What Jesus wants it to be will be fully restored. There's an interesting statement in the book Selected Messages, Volume 3. We talk about the Feast of Trumpets being a warning for the Day of Atonement. 10 days, and there will be judgment. Trumpets. Solemn events before us are yet to transpire. Trumpet after trumpet is to be sounded. Vial after vial poured out, one after another, upon the inhabitants of the earth. If you can read that, it says Selected Messages, Volume 3, page 426. in Revelation we have the 7 trumpets. Trumpets were always a warning or a call to come together for the people. But in Revelation they're a warning. Well, in the historical understanding of prophecy, there are events that have happened that fulfilled those trumpets. But here it says, trumpet after trumpet is to be sounded. They're still coming. Anything that happened in the past, 100 or 150 or 200 years ago, was a warning to that generation. But this generation needs to be warned. Anything that happened more than 10 years ago doesn't have much effect nowadays. Those trumpets are going to sound again as a warning to this generation that judgment is coming. And then, vial after vial is going to be poured out. Those plagues are going to come. So we are going to get a warning. Now, after the Festival of Trumpets, and then the Day of Atonement, all that was done in the tabernacle, that was done on the 10th day of the month. Then on the 15th of the month was the biggest celebration that the Jews had. It was one that they just thoroughly enjoyed. They came together for the Feast of Tabernacles. That was the celebration of several different things. They were restored as God's covenant people. They had finished their harvest. During the early part of the summer, they had done the grain harvest. The latter part of the summer was all the fruit harvest, the pomegranates and the dates and the figs and grapes and everything. By the time they got to the Feast of Tabernacles time, their harvest was completed. They had experienced God's blessing of a good harvest, and so they were celebrating being at one with God again. They were celebrating a good harvest, bountiful, everything that they had. And part of the symbolism of the Feast of Tabernacles was looking back on their wilderness journey and thinking about the way things had been in their temporary dwellings in the wilderness, and now they were established in their homeland. I got a few quotes here talking about the concept of the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles was not only commemorative but typical, and not only pointed back to the wilderness sojourn, but as the Feast of Harvest, it celebrated the ingathering of the fruits of the earth and pointed forward to the great day of final ingathering, and that's still coming, when the Lord of the harvest shall send forth his reapers to gather the tares together in bundles for the fire and gather the wheat into his garner. The people of Israel praised God at the Feast of Tabernacles as they called to mind his mercy in their deliverance from the bondage of Egypt and his tender care for them during their pilgrim life in the wilderness. They rejoiced also in the consciousness of pardon and acceptance, the atonement, through the service of the Day of Atonement just ended. But when the ransomed of the Lord shall have been safely gathered into the heavenly Canaan, forever delivered from the bondage of the curse, they will rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. Christ's great work of atonement for men will then have been completed, and their sins will have been forever blotted out. We can look forward to that celebration. When all of this stuff that's going on now is going to be finished. When we can be with God in the kingdom. That's going to be quite a celebration. We can't even imagine that. But all of the fall festivals talk about what is going to happen as God wraps up the world's history, as he brings everything to an end. Okay, we talked a little bit, just briefly, about cleansing the heavenly sanctuary of the sin problem. Jesus is going to finally take all of the sin of all of the righteous people, his people, and put him on the head of Satan, and he's going to be banished, and finally he's going to perish for his responsibility of making you and I do the things we do. He doesn't make us do it, but he instigates it. We have promises that the devil cannot make you do anything, but he can sure put the pressure on. All the powers of hell cannot cause a person to sin. Sin is always our own choice. But he's the one that instigates it, and he tries to get us to do it. So eventually, he's going to die for his responsibility in that. Okay, we talked about cleansing of sin, the heavenly sanctuary. We talked a little bit about the little horn and all that he corrupted. I shouldn't say he, all that it, the system, the Roman system and all of the corruption of that. All of those things that were twisted and put in place that shouldn't have been there, the daily and all of that, how that in that prophecy of the sanctuary being cleansed, how that those things were restored and will be finally restored. Now I'm going to turn to another aspect of cleansing that I think is really the most important. These other things are very important to understand, but I think what I'm going to talk about now is the most important. The cleansing that happens in you. Soul cleansing. You know, the Day of Atonement was not just something that the people stood by and watched. It was not a spectator event. It was a very serious time. Like I said, it wasn't a sad time because they were looking forward to, when it was all over with, they would have a celebration. But it was very serious. Whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. Now, I don't know that we understand the seriousness of being cut off. But if you ever have a chance, go through the Old Testament with a computer search and look at all the places where that expression cut off is used. In Psalms, you'll find it quite often, where David talks about what it meant to be cut off. That was excommunication. But it was more than just being put out of the church. It was being put away from God's covenant people. It was being put away from your relatives. You didn't have connections with relatives anymore. You were out, more like an outlaw. Those people maybe starved to death, for all I know. I don't know. But being cut off was a very serious thing. Anybody that did not personally enter into the seriousness of the Day of Atonement, confessing their sins, making sure that they personally were right with God, was cut off. Now that's a symbol, as I understand it, of what Revelation talks about, the second death. When you study through the Old Testament and understand the seriousness of being cut off, it's like what will happen in the second death, in the later part of Revelation, where the wicked will experience the mental anguish and the physical anguish of being forever separated from God, knowing that you could have been saved if you had taken advantage of what God offered. They will have full realization of that, and it's going to be a terrible time of suffering. And then they will finally just be extinguished. So what Jesus is doing in the heavenly sanctuary now is not something that we just stand by and wait for it to finish up. We need to get involved because he wants to cleanse each one of us. Day by day and year by year, we shall conquer self and grow into a noble heroism. This is our allotted task, but it cannot be accomplished without help from Jesus, and there's 5 things. I want you to take notice of those underlined things. Without help from Jesus, resolute decision, unwavering purpose, continual watchfulness, and unceasing prayer. I don't know if you want to write those down, but those are important points. Each one has a personal battle to fight. Not even God can make our characters noble or our lives useful unless we become co-workers with him. There is something that God cannot do. He cannot change you unless you cooperate. Well, he could. I mean, he has the power to do it, but he won't do it. We need to cooperate with him in any change that's going to happen. Those who decline the struggle lose the strength and joy of victory. What I'd like to do now, and I'm probably going to have to hurry along here, is I would like to just highlight a few of the aspects of life where we probably need some cleansing. I think, again, I want to say, cleansing your soul temple is the most important thing that needs to be done, because that's where God wants to get the sin out of. He's got to get the sin out of you, or you can't go to heaven. So I'm just going to mention some things here, and this isn't a complete list, and it's not in any particular order, but I just want to share some things for you to think about how you need to deal with things in your own life. Here's a marathon runner. You notice he doesn't have a backpack on. He's not carrying a bunch of stuff. Oh boy, that got cut off at the bottom. Hebrews 12, verse 1 and 2. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience or endurance. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. This is a word picture of a race in front of a stadium full of people. You have this great cloud of witnesses. You're going to run a race. Now get rid of anything that's going to hold you back. Don't let anything hold you back. And he talks about lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Now that phrase there, the sin that doth so easily beset us, that to me is just another way of saying addictions. I don't care what kind of addiction it is. Food addiction, shopping addiction, sex addiction, whatever. It's something that easily besets you. It's so easy to do it because it's so automatic. That's an addiction. We need to get rid of those things. And a lot of times we don't recognize them because we like them. You know, I do something because I like it. But it may not be good for me. It may be wrong. We need God to show us those things. Looking unto Jesus, I'll have to finish the verse because it's not showing up there. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So we need to get rid of those things that can hold us back. And you're going to have to talk to God yourself about what might be holding you back. Nobody else can do that for you. You got to go to him yourself. You recognize that? Stock market, Wall Street, whatever you call it, New York Stock Exchange, I guess is what it is. Let each of those to whom are committed sacred trusts inquire, how do I meet the inspecting eye of God? Is my heart cleansed from its defilement, or have its temple courts become so desecrated, so occupied with buyers and sellers that Christ finds no room? The bustle of business, if continuous, will dry up spirituality and leave the soul Christless. The bustle of business. Business can be earning money, or it can just be busyness. I think that's one of our most common problems, is just busyness. We're so occupied with all kinds of things that we don't give God the time he needs. The bustle of business, if continuous, will dry up spirituality. We need to focus on what's the most important in life, not just whatever comes up. Oh boy, you know what that is. It is now that our brethren should be cutting down their possessions instead of increasing them. We are about to move to a better country, even a heavenly. How many of you have moved from one home to another, or from one town to another, or another state? Do you go to all the rummage sales just before you move to see how much you can buy before you move? In the last about 6 years, we've moved about 10 times, and we keep trying to get rid of more and try to get rid of more because we just have too much stuff. We still have too much. We're about to move to a better country, even a heavenly. Then let us not be dwellers upon the earth, but be getting things into as compact a compass as possible. let your stuff go. We can't be collecting stuff and hanging on to stuff because our stuff is going to burn.
How do you determine what to leave and what to keep?
We say that God is the owner of everything and we're stewards, right? So if you're wondering what to let go and what to keep, ask the owner. God is the owner. He says, if we put our things on the altar, He'll tell us when and what to do. If we don't do that, we'll be allowed to keep our stuff, and it's going to rise up like a mountain to overwhelm us. Let not your property be tied up in worldly enterprises, so that this work shall be hindered. God has a work that He wants to do, and it needs our support. Sometimes that support is in financial ways, sometimes it's other ways. Here we're talking about financial ways. Get your means where you can handle it for the benefit of the cause of God. Send your treasures before you into heaven. That comes from Testimonies, Volume 5, page 464. The reference is way off to the side over there. But God wants us to use His stuff, because what we claim as ours is actually His. Use His stuff for what He wants or what He thinks is important. That looks good. What does Jesus say in John 15? Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can ye except ye abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He that abideth in me and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. Without me you can do nothing. When it comes to living for God, living the spiritual life, we have to have a connection with Him. That's said over and over in a lot of different ways. Without having a connection with Him, it's totally useless to try to live a Christian life, no matter what you profess. If you don't have that connection, a real, living, vital connection, it's not going to work. Here we have a very serious verse, and this is usually applied to men, but it can be applied to women in possibly different ways. You've heard that it was said by them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell. Then he says, if your right hand offend you, cut it off. That word offend in there, we think of when somebody is offended, that their feelings are hurt or something like that. Or if you offend someone, you do something they don't like, and so, that kind of thing. That word does not really mean that. That word, the Greek word where that is translated from, means a trap, a snare trigger. Okay? Look at this picture. See where that points? That's the trigger that will snap that trap shut. If your right eye is the trigger that causes you to sin, then do something about it. Now, I don't know if He actually wants us to gouge our eye out. I don't think He wants that. What He wants is for us to choose against letting our eye lead us into sin. If your eye is what's trapping you, then do something about it. Quit looking at that. If your hand is leading you into sin, if what you're doing is leading you into sin, stop doing it. Or you're going to be trapped. This is kind of I could back up here. You've probably heard the little story about how they catch monkeys. Make a hole in something that's pretty small, and then put something in there that looks attractive to the monkey. And the monkey comes along and reaches in to get it, but when he has it in his fist is too big to pull back out of the hole, and he doesn't want to let it go, and so he's trapped. If he'd just open his hand and pull it out, he'd be free. We had a video that showed that, and it was just really something, where the monkey got his hand stuck in there and would not let it go, and he was trapped. Anyway. The Torah. Remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. This is a very well-known verse to those of us that are here. Remember the law of Moses with the statutes and judgments. There's several places in the Bible where we have the expression of God remembering somebody or something. Now that's not because he has a poor memory, but it's because whatever that was or whoever the person was came to high priority and he did something for them. He remembered Noah in the ark. He took care of him. He remembered Rachel. He allowed her to have children. There's various other places where it talks about God remembering. And this is the same word as Exodus 20, where it says, remember the Sabbath. Okay? Now, it's talking about statutes and judgments. And I'm going to have to skip along here. This is where Moses is talking to the people, and he says, you need to keep the commandments and the statutes and judgments that you may live and multiply, and the Lord will bless you in the land where you go. Here we have a quote that says, these directions which the Lord gave to his people express the principles of the law of the kingdom of God, and they are made specific. Anyhow, the last sentence there, I guess it's the last sentence. The message has not grown weak because of age. I got to find it here so I can read it completely. The message has not grown weak because of age. God's claims are just as binding now, just as fresh in their importance, as God's gifts are fresh and continual. The statutes and judgments still stand. Now, what are they? A lot of people don't even know what they are. So I'm going to give you a few examples of statutes and judgments. Okay? The verse is, if you lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury. The statute is, don't charge interest to a fellow Christian. Okay? Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. That word talebearer means gossip. Okay? Don't gossip. What's gossip? Telling something about someone to someone else that is usually negative. I mean, we don't go around gossiping about the good things people do. You go around telling about other things they do. Don't gossip. If there be a poor man among you, or a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates, anyhow, it's talking about a poor man, thou shalt not shut thine hand from thy poor brother, thou shalt open thy hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. The statute is, be generous to the poor. God, that's a command of God. Be generous. There's quite a few places where God talks about, if somebody has a need, give it to them. I want you to give it to them. I want you to take care of those that have needs like that. I'm having trouble with my page here. A woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. All that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. The statute is, don't wear clothing that's intended for the other gender, or that resembles the other gender. There's so many times you go down the street, you see somebody, and you don't know which they are. There's an awful lot of intermingling of clothing, and God says, don't do that. The path of the just is as a shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. God's truth is an advancing truth, and He wants us to keep learning and keep looking, keep on trying to understand things better. I'm already out of time, but I want to finish here. Wonderful possibilities are open to those who lay hold of the divine assurances of God's Word. There are glorious truths to come before the people of God. Privileges and duties which they do not even suspect to be in the Bible will be laid open before them. As they follow on in the path of humble obedience, doing His will, they will know more and more of the oracles of God. As we want to know more of what He has for us, He's going to show it to us, and we can keep advancing, keep learning more, understanding more, and becoming more of the kind of people that He wants us to be. The full reference there is Testimonies, Volume 8, page 322. Okay? Here's another metaphor for digging deep. Those who have been diligently working in the mines of God's Word and have discovered the precious ore in the rich veins of truth. And it goes on and talks about there is so much truth and so much understanding that we still need. We've only begun to understand God. We're going to be continuing, when we get to the kingdom, we'll continue studying and learning for eternity. Here we have the sanctuary again, and this is just kind of a summary. The courtyard represents justification, the very first phase of our salvation. The holy place represents sanctification, the character development, the learning, the education that we need to prepare for the final glorification in the presence of God. That's our goal. That's what we're headed for, and that's where we need to be putting our effort. Jesus is coming. Are you ready? Are you at one? Are you ready to meet Him? Are you cleansed and purified? They shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels. You want to be one of His jewels? It's important for us to cleanse ourselves, to let Him cleanse us. We don't cleanse ourselves. Let Him cleanse us. Let Him work on us the way He wants to, so that we can be among His jewels.